Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to all of you who've joined in for today's live session today and who weren't in a position to attend yesterday's live session. I think we have still about, it's just about 10:30 in India, and we'll just give about a minute or two for learners to just join in, because I think it's typically it takes about a minute or two for the link to just pop up and for you to just join in. So once again, good morning, Happy New Year to all of you. And today is live session number 3. This is the third of your 4 live sessions that we have for the marketing, web and social media analytics specialization, your MBAX program. All right. And so we've got 4 attendees at the moment. And I think we should be getting a few more in a few minutes as we go on. So today's session is going to be a lot more of demos compared to yesterday's session, which was a bit of like the content which we talked about. And we couldn't touch upon one topic or one demo yesterday, which we'll start off with today. And I'll just give it about a minute or so, right? And yeah, in the meantime, I hope all of you can hear me loud and clear, and you can see my screen clearly in this sense, right? So I'll just start off. Hi, my name is Rajiv, and I am your professor for today's session. As I mentioned, this is live session number 3, and we've already completed 2 live sessions. One was yesterday evening, and we had one which was the previous weekend. We also kind of touched base on Tuesday last week, which was about the briefing session for the case study. And I bring about over 21 years of total experience, of which a decent amount of that experience has been in marketing analytics, not just as a person who was making the marketing analytics models, but also kind of like pitching marketing analytics projects as part of a media agency in India and for a short time in Singapore too. So I'll be touching and digging into different anecdotes within my whole experience to kind of like bring to life aspects of today's session. All right. And before that, I hope everyone is safe and well. In the next 2.5 hours, what we will be doing is we'll be just touching or just reconnecting on some of the topics we spoke about in the last live session. In case if anyone has any questions, we can bring it up and all that. This session is mainly for you, for each one of you, the learners, to come up and discuss if you have any questions, any queries on the topics which we've touched upon. And I will be bringing up a whole bunch of important topics just to kind of like, refresh your memory in case if you've already gone through the async content, which is on the platform, on the UpGrad platform. But in case if you haven't, no worries at all. You can just treat this just a reconnect of those topics. And I'll bring some of those topics to life by just elaborating on some points here and there and giving real life examples wherever I can. All right. So that's the content which we'll be touching through over the next 2.5 hours. And the same old agreement that we all have that, this session is mainly for you, the learner, to come up with questions that you might have. I will keep prodding on a whole lot of topics to just kind of bring up those topics in case if you do have any aspects you want to talk about. Do keep an open mind. That's the most important aspect of today's interaction for 2.5 hours. You have an opportunity to either use your microphone to raise a hand and ask a question, or you could just type in your question or query in the chat box, And I will keep periodically having a look at the chat box to just see if there are any questions. All right. And moving on, yes, I hope you're all comfortable because it's pretty much like, Sunday morning in India. And yes, I know it's pretty much like the rest of Sunday is left onto that. And so please be comfortable for these next 2.5 hours as we go on. And if we could just start off with a quick recap of the live session number 2, right? We talked about when it comes to RFM scoring, like how would you define basis average RFM scoring? How do you define customers, and what is the specific marketing strategy? I'm sorry, there was a typo over here. Yeah, so apologies for that. Yeah, so there we go. Yeah. So this is pretty much like, how do you actually kind of like make decisions after you do the RFM analysis? This is a quick summary of how, if your average RFM score of your customers, like customers with an average RFM score of over 3.5, is who we call as our breadwinner high value customers. Like they basically earn our revenue for us, and you have to kind of like distinctly give them the benefits of being a breadwinner for the business by retaining them with specific exclusive loyalty programs, right? And then obviously, if your customers are within the range of like an average score of 2 and 3.5, it's an upsell opportunity where you give them offers of discounts and additional values to just encourage them to either increase their recency, frequency, or monetary score. Eventually, you would want to get them to spend more. So hence, you would want to move them up from a monetary value of, like, say, 1 or 2 to 3 and 4. All right. So that's the whole intention for those customers who are within the average RFM score of 2 to 3.5. And for those who are under 2, an average RFM score of 2, for those of them, you really would want to just focus on any spillover media. Like, you wouldn't want to go all the way out and spend your scarce marketing resources or budgets on dormant customers. They're liable to churn, in other words, right? And we talked a bit more about churn modeling in that. And essentially, if you remember, we also touched upon LTV and CAC ratios and how the lifetime value and CAC numbers and the ratios give you a clear indication about what is the situation or what is the life stage of a particular brand, service, or product. Like, are they spending more because they're pretty much like, on a low user base, or are they actually established but they're bleeding a lot of users? Like, they aren't able to retain, and there's a huge churn in the customer base over there because something seems to not be working over there. So these are indicative numbers to have a good peek into the health of your brand. All right. And we also talked about the sources for LTV, CAC, CSAT, and NPS. We spent a bit of time to also touch upon that the end survey for any of your live sessions in itself is a valuable input that the upgrade and NMIMS teams look into in detail to understand that, is the content working? Is the timing working? Is the delivery mechanism? Is the subject matter expert or the professor good enough and stuff like that? So here are all indicators from your individual scores that help us to understand, what is the net promoter score and the customer satisfaction score when it comes to in this case, the live sessions, right? So then we also touched upon churn modeling. We discussed about churn is natural. It's very rare to have 0% churn. Why? Simply because you are most likely not to be consuming the same set of products or services from your infancy as a child all the way to your middle age and to your old age, right? There are few products that come in and go, but there are very few which, or possibly none, that you've consumed ever since you were a child, right? So hence churn is a very normal phenomenon to happen, but it's what we call as voluntary and involuntary churn, which we just touched upon very briefly with examples of TikTok versus a person switching from Twitter to Koo in India versus the situation which happened in 2020, middle of 2020, about 2 years ago, when TikTok suddenly found itself not available in India. So obviously, whoever was there on TikTok in India had to involuntarily churn outside. All right. Then we also talked about how churn modeling and even segmentation come close to each other, and how it is more important for us to understand voluntary and involuntary churn also. That churn tends to happen whenever you shift across, and this is just to put a number on a demographic segmentation on what we call as the generations over here, like people who are born between 1928 and 45, who form part of that silent um, customers as such, or what we call as senior citizens and so on. Senior citizens also come under the, not exactly all of them, but a sizable bunch who are in their 60s come under the baby boomers, like those who have a year of birth from 1946 to 64. And it's all about understanding that sometimes, I mean, churn does happen for products and services in terms of relevance. So something which is relevant today for a millennial might not be relevant for a Gen Alpha or a Gen Z, because it's been seen as a uncle brand or an auntie brand, or my father's brand or my mother's brand as such. So hence the core challenge is to manage vertical churn versus horizontal churn. And what do I mean by that? Horizontal churn is obviously when it will happen that, people who are entering into a particular age group, you have to be relevant to, I mean, within the next 5 years, you as a brand, if you are a brand that targets teenagers, 13 to 19-year-olds, then what would happen is that you have to be relevant for the current 13 to 19-year-old. And you also have to keep an eye on the fact that, you also need to appeal in the next 5 years to a 6 to 12-year-old also. So that is a natural thing that you have to manage. But the more important day-to-day or year-to-year challenge within those 5 years is that you need to manage your vertical churn, like whether, just as the example of people leaving Twitter to join Koo, stuff like that is exactly where you have competitor brands. Like this is like vertical switching between brands, or you're switching across, like, categories and stuff like that. So that's one of the biggest challenges for you to manage churn. Churn is an important part of, like, of what you do in your marketing efforts, especially when you are a digital marketer, because in many cases you lose the physical face-to-face touch that a brick and mortar organization would have compared to a digital only organization, right? I mean, so far you've never visited an Amazon store in India or a Flipkart store. A Lenskart store, yes. A Pepper Fries store, yes. And I think that's what we've come to see, that, this whole physical, digital, phygital existences are what we now look at. And the main reason you could argue for having both physical and digital sort of formats for, like, sales channels or touch points, as we call it, is largely down to the fact that, that you have acquisition saturation coming after a point of time, and you also have a challenge to manage churn for people to not leave your product or service, right? So hence it becomes an important thing to manage vertical churn over horizontal churn. We talked a bit more about, like, what goes behind churn modeling, like how can you predict churn, or in other words, is there a way, is there a formula for us to understand what are the key factors that can help us give an indication whether a customer segment might churn or not? Like what we spoke about a few slides ago was that at one point of time, if a segment of our, we did, like hypothetically, if we did RFM segmentation and we came across a sizable bunch of our customers within the average RFM score of 2 to 3.5, right? What if they suddenly slipped into under 2 average RFM score the next time that we did that? If that happens, then of course, one of the most important things for us to do is to get some sort of indicators of what could be causing, or what are the early signs for us to know if a segment or a bunch of customers, right, are bound to churn. Now the reason why we do that is, I mean, with digital marketing and with digital media in play, we have a lot of customer data, right? And with a whole lot of customer data that you have, right, metadata or like associated or relative data compared to just the number of people who are clicking, visiting our website, liking, right, all of those things. We also have a lot of additional demographic data, a whole lot of other data when it comes to, like, say, device ownership, comes to also different aspects about like which region of India they come from, what is their PIN code, and so on. So given a lot of this rich information, if they, and we also know after a point of time whether they have whether they've stuck on with our product or service, or whether they've churned out. So we saw as an example yesterday, like we just built a dummy data set and then we pretty much walked through the process on how you build a churn modeling sort of a model, so to speak. And we also touched upon like there are 4 types of, like the usual 4 ML models that we have, from naive Bayesian to either like your logistic regression, your decision tree, and so on, right? And essentially what we then did is we just walked through how do you select between these 4 MLs, and we talked about the confusion matrix and the metrics, which is sensitivity, specificity, your accuracy, and error rate. So we have these 4 metrics which help you to analyze the decision, the confusion matrix that you might get for each one of these 4 models, and how do you pick and choose which metric matters the most. Okay, and we touched upon this, and if you remember, we talked on accuracy, error rate, specificity, and sensitivity, right? So the part where we pretty much didn't have much time yesterday to touch upon, and which we'll start off with today, is that, you know, what do you do in terms of if you get data, correct? And if you get the data for, or you get different data sets, the main part of a marketing analytics project, right, is that we start by collating the data set into a master data set. Then we move on to a data cleaning process where once we get all the individual data, sort of like, you know, like data sets from different like sources or different stakeholders, we collate it together into one master data set. We do the process of data cleaning and data validation, and we also do data transformation onto it. And then we start doing what we call as the EDA, the exploratory data analysis, which is a big chunk of what we are also calling as descriptive analytics. Okay, and then only after that is done is then we start building the model. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you like this process over here, which is step 1, step 2, 3, and 4. So rather 1, 2, and 3 is mainly what we call as data wrangling. Okay, and by data wrangling, I'm just going to flip on to an Excel, right? And can you all see my Excel sheet? Is it visible for everyone? Perfect. Okay. All right. Perfect. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, this is the section which we did not have much time to complete yesterday, but I will touch upon this. Yeah, I'm just going to expand that, Mr. Sandeep, one moment. And yeah. Is this good enough right now? Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So it's visible and I am also audible, correct? Okay. Perfect. And what I'm going to just do before that is I'm just going to, so this is like what you notice over here. It's a master data tab over here that you find. And this is just, I mean, this is just the whole Excel. It's the same Excel sheet in which we did the whole confusion matrix. This will come to you after today's session today. Okay. And the first demo is on, like, data wrangling. And I'm just going to call it as master data. And I'm going to call it as data wrangling. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, for those of you who remember in the last live session or in the first live session, we spent some time to discuss about ATL, BTL, and different types of data that come that come under marketing data, right? So what we're going to do in data wrangling, and I'm just going to type it out over here. Okay, in data wrangling. Okay, and this, of course, we're doing it in Excel because Excel is one of the most easiest tools to kind of demonstrate the workings in, right? Because unfortunately, if you move on to either SQL, or if you move on to Python, or you go on to a Jupyter notebook, or any other, like if it is RStudio, which is an integrated development environment, IDE as we call it, these are all next steps when you start dealing with a whole lot of data which doesn't fit into an Excel sheet. All right. And but the advantage in Excel is that you can you can get to actually see the workings and explain it without the need for everyone knowing the same package or code and stuff like that. So the next step after this is to move on to, like, either SQL, or to kind of, like, move on to R, or like RStudio, or like, Jupyter notebooks, and also, like, if it is Python and stuff like that, in which you just write the code and it executes that for yourself. Like, you have Panda data frames and stuff like that. But today's session is for all of you to get the fundamentals right. And for that, Excel does a very good job. And also the other reason is because Excel, if you look at the total number of cells that you have, you can take about, like, if you have like a row by row data for every customer, you can even kind of take an Excel dump of like up to 1 million plus, right? This is like the number of rows that you have. So before you had, like, before in earlier versions of Excel, you had like 66,000, 68,000 was the limit for the number of entries, or the number of rows records that you could kind of, like, have for it. But in this case, of course, we have close to 1 million. So depending on how big the data size you have, you can choose between Excel if it is like within 1 million or so. Of course, it'll take some time to process the whole thing, depending on your computer speed and your computer like specs as such. Like if it is 16 GB of RAM or 32 GB of RAM, it'll do it faster. So anyhow, just coming back to data wrangling. Now, by data wrangling, if you remember from the PPT, I spoke about, like, there were like different stages. So stage 1, right, is data collation, right? Number 2 is data cleaning, right? Number 3 is data validation. Okay. Okay. Number 4 is data transformation. Okay. So these are the different steps that you have when it comes to this part, right? So you have collation into a data set, data cleaning, data validation, and data transformation. And if you can see the, I'm just going to show this once again to you such that you can see it once again, right? And there we go. So as I said, it's collating data into a master data set. Then there's data cleaning and data validation. I've split these up into 2 stages, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then we have the 4th one, which is data transformation. Now, before this, there's also one more step. Okay. And sorry, I'll just share that screen once again. Yeah. And before this, there is also, like, I would say this is, yeah, I'll just change it into number 2, number 3, and number 4 is before that, or yeah, actually we could call it as, my bad, one moment. This is number 1, data collation. And I would just put this as, like, 1A, all right, which is the data audit creation. Okay, and I'll just explain that in a moment. So the first step is very important for us to understand. Like, each one of them are equally important. You can't skip, like, say, one of these steps over here to get into like data validation or data transformation. In case if you accidentally do that, normally you will be rerouted back to this process or back to square 1 or square 2, because if you've made any error in any of these steps, automatically your model, and obviously, like, step 5 is EDA creation, which, if you remember, is your descriptive analytics. And of course, 6 is model building, okay, which we'll touch upon tomorrow. Okay, as in building a model from the whole part. So essentially what you're doing over here in data wrangling are these steps. I mean, these are the steps that come in data wrangling. Okay, and if you have like a marketing analytics project which you're doing, like, be it segmentation, and if you remember, like, the different marketing analytics projects that we have segmentation, then you have A/B testing, then you have churn modeling, right? Then you have market mix or media mix modeling, okay? And then, of course, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, these are the 4 usual kind of, like, topics that you create on the whole part. Of course, you have different variations to churn modeling, in which, depending on the ML techniques that you use, it could be like, ML slash AI slash deep learning techniques, right? Coming out over here. But broadly, I would say that, I mean, when it comes to these particular marketing analytics projects, right? This is the range of what you're expected to do when it comes to, like, digital marketing. Okay. Now, coming in terms about each one of these, I mean, if you remember the summary slide which I showed to you, it's all the similar thing that you will do. Like, it applies to segmentation, all right? It also applies, sorry, let me just change that color. It applies to segmentation. In A/B testing, obviously, you will do, like, of course, it's a shorter run when it comes to A/B testing, and we'll touch upon that part. Okay, but in this case, you would do the data collation, you would do the data audit if you would want, correct? And you wouldn't need to do the data transformation, or you'd want to do the validation and the cleaning at times. In churn modeling, you will need to do the whole thing over here. And the same thing also applies for market mix modeling, right? Now, these durations are very different. Okay, this could take, and I'm just putting it over there as a whole thing. Sorry about that. And essentially, what we're doing in this case is that this would take about 1 to 2 weeks at times, right, for this stage. Now, when it comes to this particular A/B testing, it's a quicker process. You could do it actually like all in the process, or and even running the whole A/B test experiment, as we call it. If you remember, this is also called as experiments. Okay. And by doing all of this, what we tend to do is essentially we kind of because an A/B test can happen quicker. This can happen even within 1 week time for the whole experiment. I mean, experiment. Sorry about that typo. Yeah. So essentially, what is happening in this case is this takes a decent amount of time because the data size is sometimes huge. But if you've already done a segmentation process like a RFM or a k-means or a hierarchical segmentation, right? It doesn't take that much time compared to these two. Like these two, it'll take easily about 3 to 4 weeks on average, right? For getting just this stage, all right? And it's very important for us to know, and this is just again depending on what we know. Like it could be more, right? Because if your data isn't in place, then you can't build the model. Like building the model takes far, I mean, these stages would not take you too much time. Like this could take probably 1 to 2 weeks more, or this would be like lesser, like in a week over here. This is again for the whole experiment. So you could actually do this process all the way here for an A/B test, and we'll talk about it later today. Whereas over here, this is one stage, which is just about a week to 2 weeks time. Whereas over here, it's another week over for this, and then it builds up over there. So this is for you all to get an idea about how long it normally takes to do each one of these over here, right? And this could take again 1 to 2 weeks depending on the size, I mean, or depending on how long it takes over there. And the same thing, which is 1 week for that, for 1 week over here. Yeah. So this is just like a breakup for you to get to know what happens during the whole course of whole, across these marketing analytics projects over here. So this by itself, it takes, when it comes to churn modeling and market mix modeling, 4 weeks of a total of 6 weeks over here means it's taking easily 2/3 of the time, like over 65% for churn modeling and market mix modeling. It takes that much time. All right. So with segmentation, you saw that in the very first live session, it's all about getting your data fast. If your data is valid, is collated, validated, and you can do it far quicker. You can even do it within 1 week. All right. Whereas you have these projects which take you a lot more time. So if anyone gives you data tomorrow for any one of these churn modeling or market mix modeling, and they ask you to come out with the model in a week, kindly refuse, because it's easy to commit for a week, but it naturally will take a lot more time, because over here is the stage where you will, because across all stages actually, you will have a lot of back and forth with your different stakeholders, which is pretty much the reason why there is a huge premium being placed on the emotional intelligence rather than just the EQ. Sorry, I mean rather than the IQ. So the point I'm making over here is comm skills and working with teams, diverse teams across time zones, right, is of paramount importance. Okay. And that's exactly a skill, and hence the emotional quotient versus the sole focus on focus on intelligence quotients, right? More than IQ, it is more of EQ plus IQ. Okay. And this is the reason why, I mean, like, you know, if you are more patient, if you are more understanding, if you're more empathetical, if you can understand and be open to taking a lot more ideas, I mean, like, you know, if it's a person as a data entry operator who you're fine talking with, and at the same time also you're fine talking with a CEO or a CXO. So if you're very flexible to talk with different kinds of people and stuff like that, these are all the skills, like, you know, or as I said, EQ plus IQ is any day greater than IQ only. All right. And this is something which you'll find as in job interview, or not just job interviews. If you look at job descriptions, people ask about, like, you know, can you make complex topics simple for different people who don't have time? So stuff like that. So essentially why it comes into play is because of all of these different aspects. Now let's get down into each one of these. Okay, what is data collation? What is data audit creation? What is data cleaning? What is data validation and transformation? Okay, now let's start with the first part, data collation. Quick question. Do you think that, I mean, this is, of course, I'm showing it to you ready-made, but do you ever, in any of these projects, do you think that all of this data is coming from a single source or from different sources or different people? Okay, so multiple. Okay, different sources. Perfect. So I'm happy that we don't have any misplaced expectation that it will all come together ready-made. Okay, so let's start with that first part. Let's first start putting down, and I'm just going to keep adding on to this Excel sheet. Okay, and this Excel sheet will come to you, and nonetheless, this recording is anyhow being captured. All right, so let's first start with the source of information. So where is the source of data for these? So you have, obviously, this is going to be, oh, let me just put it over here. Okay. You have the source of data. So e-commerce sales, if I were to ask, okay, hypothetically, and let me just build up the case over here. So hypothetically, if you are working for, say, Lenskart, okay. So I'm just building this hypothetical case scenario, right? And I'm mentioning it over here that you are working for, you are part of Lenskart's marketing team, all right? And I'm mentioning that you have access to some client or some internal data, okay, which is Lenskart, and you have relationships with the digital agency Lenskart, plus, like, you know, individual relationships with, like, say, Google, Facebook, plus, like, you know, your internal sales team, or, like, you know, retail sales, plus other teams. Okay, So this is the background I'm just building for all of, for all of us to be on the same page. Okay. So this is the, let me just make this a bit more clearer for you. One moment. Okay. So this is the overall story. Okay. And if this is the case for all of us, so now let's start looking at where the source of the data is. So e-commerce sales, it would be internal Lenskart. It could be the e-commerce team, correct? Who will have access to that data. And then if I were to start building into the different aspects of it, right? We'll just go into this part. Yeah, so you have internal sales team over here. Then display advertising, it would be, in this case, it could either be the digital agency or Lenskart. Okay. Else it could be, because the digital agency does a good job of being the interface between the client and between the different, because they could be like India Times, they could be like different publisher sites, right? They could be India Times, which is all the Times of India network and so on. It could be NDTV, it could be a whole lot of other publisher sites, like if it is Harper Bazaar India and so on. Okay, so they do the display advertising part of it. Then YouTube is, it could be either the digital agency or it could be a direct relationship with Google. Okay. Right? And then if it is SEM over there, it could be either your performance team, because in many organizations, you have performance teams, which are internal teams only who deal with just search, be it SEM and SEO, right? So it could be a performance team which is sitting internal, okay? Or it could be the digital agency, correct? So that's one other source of who's sharing this data. For Facebook, you could either have the internal team, if you are internal social team, right? Or it could also be Facebook directly. Print, it will be in most cases. So print and TV data is usually coming from like a media agency, okay? Because they have the databases to get access to the data on each of this. So what happens is that, and question to all of you, do you think that they will, obviously you can ask them that, can you please give me data, on a weekly basis or a monthly basis and so on, right? But essentially what happens in this case is you will get data coming across, just to build on that, like e-commerce data. If I were to add, what the data frequency is, the data frequency for each one of these, right, could vary. Like you can get minute by minute, right, to hour, to day, to what we call as say weekly data, versus you can also get monthly data. You can aggregate it. So that's the data frequency that you have options for. Okay. Whereas when it comes to, in this case, like if it is display, you can do the same thing over here, but most probably it will come down to we can break it down by, you would want to kind of limit down to day, but you want to break it down by minute and stuff like that, you can do that. YouTube ads also for digital data, you can do it in that sense. The same thing also for this. You could also do it for here. But when it comes to traditional media, which is what is over here, okay, traditional media, and this is digital media, okay, digital media. So if you're looking at traditional and digital media, you will notice that you will face a bottleneck over here, because print, you can do it on a daily basis or a monthly basis. or a weekly or a monthly basis. Why? Because you have a monthly magazine, you have a daily newspaper, you have a weekly magazine also, correct? So because of that one reason, you can't drill it down by, like in this case, minute, hour, day, weekly, month, and stuff like that. The same thing when it comes to your media agency over here, when it comes to TV. TV, you can actually go down to minute by minute. There are some data points that you can pull it up for. Okay. And this is only when it comes to your ratings, your, like, TV ratings only, right? TV spends, to some extent, you can do it like, on a TV extent, I mean, to some extent, okay, you can do that part. So herein lies one whole challenge for data harmonization. All right. So the whole thing which you do over here, correct? So when you collate data, the first thing what you do is, in data collation, which is step number one, you start to kind of put all of them together into one master data set. Okay. And if you start putting it into a master data set where you're collating data from different sources, you have like these different internal sources, right? What you would be doing is, one of the most important things to start off your project would be, you would be writing an email or getting into touch with each one of these different people, giving them the background and communicating to them exactly what you want. Like, you want data in a particular format. So that's the other thing. Coming on to these other aspects, right? And I'm just going to keep adding on to this part over here. Okay. You will notice that, like, data format is an important thing also. They could either give you data formats in, like, say, a CSV file, okay, or it could be like, download from the cloud, or like download from marketing cloud, or be it an AWS, or like, an Azure or a Google Cloud. Yeah. So it could be that coming, or from a CRM, or whichever which you're looking into. So you would either get access to that, or you'll get like a data format coming in a particular format. The same thing also applies for each one of them. It could also be, by the way, Excel, which is CSV over here, right? I mean, I'm just putting it as XLS slash, sorry, XLS slash CSV. So it could be ranging from that, right? And the same thing also applies for, if it is like, in this case, you could get pretty much, it would be Excel, or like, download from one of these things going in over here. It goes in also pretty much like, it's mainly Excel over here. So formats could change over here. Okay. And the moment you go into these parts, you could even get it as, like, say, PDF files and so on. Sometimes it could also be like, a PDF file, like PDF report and stuff like that. So many of these different sort of formats also exist. So you have to harmonize it all into. So by data harmonization, what we mean is, you want to get the time period normal. I mean, you want to get all these time periods into the most, like, I mean, you have to roll it up, or you have to aggregate it up in such a way that they're all daily or weekly or monthly. Why? Because you don't have, I mean, the one which is aggregated to the most, right, is the one that determines the overall frequency, data frequency of the data. And that's when, if you say hypothetically get hourly data or daily data over here, if you accidentally don't mention the data frequency over here, what you would need to do is, you would need to go back and talk to the same people, like the digital agency, the Google team, or any other team, to ask them for daily data or for weekly data. Okay. Or hypothetically, if these teams gave you the data fast, okay, and you asked for hourly data, and what would happen in this case is that you got this data after 2 weeks, and you noticed at that time that they only have daily or weekly data. Then what you need to do is that you probably need to roll it up by yourself over here, and I'll explain that in a moment. Or what you need to do is you need to call, like, get in touch with them and ask them that, can you give me the same data, like e-commerce data, and can you aggregate it by weekly? Okay, so that's the big initial challenge of getting what is your data frequency. Now, the most important thing about data frequency over here is the fact that the more minute data, okay, the more minute it is, data is, or more fine the data is, the better the possibility of doing targeted marketing. Okay. What I mean to say by this thing is that if you get data by daily versus weekly versus monthly, now the challenge is that if you have, and let me just expand on this one thing. What I mean to say over here is that daily data, okay, so daily data is more actionable versus monthly data, as we can choose which day to action versus any time of the month. It's up to debate, correct? It's a debate for a month versus a year, versus a day, correct? What I mean to say is that if we've done analytics on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis, I have an option to choose which amongst 30 or 31 days, or if it is February, 28 days, which amongst those days do I need to actually start a campaign or end a campaign. But the problem is that if I have monthly data, I don't know whether I don't know when I have to deploy. Okay, so which is the reason why the more finer the data frequency, the more better you can actually make your recommendations actionable. Like it's that simple as mentioning that, we should advertise in the month of Feb versus mentioning Feb 13th is a good day because of Feb 10th to 12th is a good period because it is a run up to Valentine's Day. Okay, so the difference between we should do something in Feb versus we should target the 10th to 12th time period in Feb to target Valentine's Day, you know the difference between the actionability between all of those. Okay, so this is something which you'll have a bit of back and forth. You have a source of data, you have data frequency, you have a data format. Then there's this other part, which is something what we call as a data description. Okay. By data description, many a times, like this data column that we find, each one of these data columns, what is the explanation for that? So if this is and this explanation can best be provided by the source of the person, correct? And in this, if they're mentioning, and if you look at this, it's the internal Lenskart e-commerce team, they're mentioning that this is the e-commerce sales data. Okay. So this gives you a clear idea of what the description of the data, what does this e-commerce sale, first of all, it gives you an idea of another aspect. It gives you also what is called as the data variable name. Okay, so in case sometimes what you would notice that it is actually e-commerce sales, but it's coming as e-com, something like that. Okay, so in this case, what happens is this becomes the whole variable name. Okay, this is the whole variable name, and this is exactly what we kind of like call as the description, right? So this is the variable name, and this is the description. The description is the explanation of what is this e-commerce sales. So I'm just giving you an example over here, and I'm mentioning that, total e-commerce sales of Lenskart across website and app across website and app users. Okay, so this becomes like the data description. Now this is very important because sometimes what will happen, and I'm just building on this, is that you might get two of these, right? You might get something like this, and you might get something like this. And this adds another level of complexity, but at the same time, it also adds another layer of how you can split different things, right? So this could be website, okay? And this could be kind of like, app users. And there could be another one also for, like, say, for example, social. Okay, so depending on how fine the data or how you segment, because you're actually now doing a segmentation, right? And over here, you're seeing it come as like, WS, and over here it is coming as like, app. So here is one other thing which you can do, which is all about like, you want to do it like that, or if you want to kind of also include one more, which is social, because then you can actually decide whether you want to combine it or whether you would want to kind of like, have it separately as each one of these channels. So in other words, you can either make three separate models, right? Because if there is a question that what is the media mix or which medium is working to drive app user e-commerce or sales versus social versus website. And I'm sure you all will agree with me that, it's not saying it's not that everything works the same, because these are three different screen sizes and also different how do I say it? I mean, like, because when you're on social media, you're in a different frame of mind. Okay. So your receptivity is very different on social media. Okay. Versus if you are doing it on like, the app, okay, and versus the website. So if you have data coming in like this, and this is another important aspect, that sometimes you will get only consolidated over here. But then later on, if you have discussions internally in the team and you realize that the app team or the app product team really want to push for more budgets and they want this bifurcation between website and app, and you have the data, then what happens is you have to then start, then this whole, you have to go back to the same team and you are going to kind of like, ask them that, can you give me this breakup by these different ones. But if you would want to aggregate it together, right, and you want to call it as total e-com, so this over here is total website, right, across website users, this is app users, social users. Later on, we'll touch upon this in a moment. But if you're doing a combined, right, and what you're going to do over here is, if you get all of that in the same aspect, right, and you just want to combine it into one whole thing called as e-commerce, right, and it is an aggregation of all of these. Okay, it is social plus if it is social plus app plus website, okay, right, plus app plus social. Okay, so this is the most important thing for you to understand, that the data sets are coming from different people. Okay, the source of the data is also what we call as the data custodian of this data set. Okay, who is the data custodian? Now, you will never be the custodian for the data. You are just the, like, we are all the users of data. Okay, but the data custodian is very important for us to get this detail that we find over here. Okay, then we have data variable name, we have data description, data format, data frequency, source of data. So this one whole set, what you find over here, I'm just going to make it slightly small. Okay, this whole description slash data variable, data format, data frequency, and obviously if you're putting also another input over here called as the data periodicity. Okay, and I'm putting this one over here, data period. And over here, if you're getting, like, say, for example, Jan 2020 to present. Okay, and present always has to be mentioned clearly. So if you're mentioning December 2021, okay, and stuff like that. So once you're getting all of this into place, right, and you're doing this for all of these other ones, sorry, which is like, display, YouTube, SEM, Facebook. Once you put all of this into place, all right, that's when this whole, I'm just going to put it a bit smaller. So if I just copy this, okay, and I just kind of like, take it in the bottom over here. And if I put it over here as a separate table, okay, and I'm going to bring this one up over here, right? This becomes what I call as the data audit. Okay, the data audit, you can build it right after the data collation is done or while you're doing it, simply because the data audit gives you like a snapshot. Okay, this is just like a summary Excel, which any person who's coming on board or who's even leaving the project, right, or who is coming in the middle of a project, if anyone is getting onboarded or a person is getting like a status update or a person is leaving that project, it's very important that this document is there, because then as business continuum, what we'll notice is that this can get every person who's on the project up to speed. Like, we'll get to know that what is what, you'll get to know, okay, I've got these many, like, these are the different variables that I have. Okay, and this is the data period for it. What is the data description? What is the data format? What is the data frequency? Source of the data? And if I have, like, even if a contact person, okay, over here coming in over here, and I'm just going to fill in some like names over here, right? And if I'm doing that, then it becomes very easy for any person who's getting onto that one project to get up to speed. Just putting general names over here. And just like, building onto that. And if I'm just copying these names again, right, just for sheer need of time, I'm just putting like, these names. So then you know who to get in touch with in case if there are any errors in the data and stuff like that. So once you complete this for others also, right, like what is the description of this thing? This is like, display ad spends on digital display, right? I mean, yeah, and like, you can just call display, yeah, or like, display ad. And if it's the same thing over here, or if you're finding that, you have it only from, like, say, October. And this will again define what the size of your data is then, because the smallest data size gives you the size of the total database with it. Then YouTube is YouTube, right? And if I'm just going to fill up the remaining one, so this completes your data audit as such. So if it is YouTube ads over here, I'm just putting like, what is the data period, and I'm just filling up these as is. Then you have like, YT ads, and if I'm saying SEM ad and FP ad, this would be print ads, and this would be TV ad, right? So these would go in like probably as what are the identifiers of what the data variable name is. And then obviously over here, this is like, spends on YouTube or lens cart. Okay. Then you also have the same thing for like, SEM spends for lens cart. Okay. And then the same thing also goes in for these different ones, which is Facebook, right? And then you have over here, you have print, right? And then you go on to TV over here. Now, one other additional thing I just wanted to mention over here is sometimes if you want to do campaign analytics, like if you just want to focus on a particular campaign, like a buy one or buy two, get one free offer, what you can do is then you can actually start adding that separately. So this would be total spends, right? But in case if you want to add, right, and I'm just building up from here, if there were like, if you did like a YouTube and a whole TV thing over here and a print thing, just for that particular campaign, right? You can just kind of add that separately, and you can pull that data separately, like, buy one, get one. I mean, buy two, get one free, something like that. Okay. And what you could do is you can isolate these, and that also can be easily done over here. Okay. In other words, you need to ask for this data. And once you get that data and you pretty much call it like, that campaign. Okay. And this is exactly what, can help you to ascertain what is the impact of a specific campaign versus like, overall. And it's the same thing which I mentioned over here, that if you get data by a month versus data by a day, finer data gives you more actionability. Okay. Versus the power of your advice being that we should do something in Feb versus mentioning that we should do something in between these 3 days in Feb. It's more actionable if it is more specific. Okay. So which is what the whole point is, that you can do campaign analytics over here, and you can just mention for the for this campaign. Okay. So this is exactly the whole part on how you can even isolate. So this is also to give you an idea that, now you can start seeing that how the number of columns have started to increase. Like these are all additional data points that you can get from the team. Okay. What you find over here, the additional ones over here that we talked about, right? Like if you get these, so this is what we call as your like step one, is getting each one of these individual columns populated, okay, and getting them together into a master data sheet. The master data sheet has to be harmonized. What I mean to say by that is each one of this data record or each time period that you have over here, it has to be aggregated for each one of these columns. Okay. You can't put daily data over here and put monthly data over here. because then what will happen is you will find that if it is daily data versus monthly data, you will find that there will be like, gaps such as like you will find a gap over here because you will have daily data for this coming in here, but for other columns, it will be blank. Okay. Which is the reason why you have to have data harmonization in such a way that all the data is aggregated and looking the same. Okay. And this is exactly, if you have data organized in this format, okay, this is what we call as time series data. Okay. And time series data is important because time series data can help us understand patterns across time. And by time series data, let me just increase this a bit more. So time series data is helpful to understand the data, I mean, or the like, pattern across time for seasonality, right? So by looking at this data across time, we can understand what the patterns are, and then we can know whether, like, is it the right time to advertise or not, or is it is the right time to give an offer? Like, would you want to give like a Christmas offer today or tomorrow? No, because Christmas is already gone. Correct. And we are very early for 2022's Christmas. So it's money lost, or it is the wrong campaign to run at at this point of time. Okay. So essentially, this is data collation when you bring all of them together. And this is the data audit, which I've shown below over here. Okay. This is that document which really helps you to put things into perspective. Like, so if anyone is onboarding or leaving the team, they can get a good idea of, like, this becomes like a data audit document, because looking at this, you can immediately get to know, acha, what is the KPI? So in this case, the KPI is the e-commerce sales over here. And you also get to know, okay, what the description of each one of these other data sets, each column, who's the right person to get in touch, in which agency or which team, and you know what the data frequency. So you can get up to speed on a whole lot of things faster. What is the format? What is the data description? What is the variable name, data period, and so on. And we also talked about how you can even make it more finer to isolate the impact of a campaign on e-commerce sales, or the impact of, like, say, for example, if you have data by all e-commerce platforms, or if you just want to take website versus app versus your social over here, right? So once you've done these two steps, and I'm just going back over here, like, we've done data collation, we've done the data audit creation. Now, what is data cleaning, data validation, and data transformation? Okay. So by data cleaning, what we do in this case is that, imagine if you've got data which has come from the e-commerce team. Okay. And I'm just going to, okay, yeah, I can leave it like this, no problem. I'm not going to hide this because, like, I'll just hide it for, no, it's okay, that's fine. So in case if I've got this data come in, right, and I suddenly see that, like, there is a missing value like this, or there is another value like this, correct, and somewhere this is coming as 0. All right. So by data validation, what I do is I need to understand, or I need to pluck out what these are. These look like either errors, or these look like some misfits in the overall data. Okay. In other words, we know for a point that the e-commerce sales cannot kind of, like, drop from 5399519 to 0 in a week. Okay. This is weekly data over here. So this looks like a data entry error, or it looks like a data retrieval error. Okay. So we need to fix this. All right. So when it comes to, and I'm just going to keep adding on to this one part. okay, in which, one moment, yeah. So what I will do in data validation, okay, I need to actually check for a few numbers. Like I basically need to check, all right, in data validation, we need to check for missing values as well as zero values. Okay. What do I mean to say by this is that in this case, when it comes to your data validation, it's you've got the data together, but now you're starting to look at each column. Okay. So what do I need to do is I basically need to look out for that and I go into filters. Okay. Now, if it is a smaller data set like the one which we have right now, you can do it manually. But otherwise, you could just do like, we could do something specifically. Yeah, sorry, my bad. This is basically data cleaning. My bad. This is not data validation. So data validation will come after that one. Thank you so much for pointing out, Mr. Jindal. Yeah. So in data cleaning, sorry, this is basically data cleaning. Yeah. So in data cleaning, we basically are doing that. Data validation is more about validating the range of the data. We'll come to that in a moment. Yeah. So in data cleaning, thank you so much for pointing that out. We need to check for these missing values. Okay. And when we are doing this one part, so what we will do is you can either manually do it by using filters, right? The other option is you could actually just do a pivot table and do it on Excel. But here is where if you have huge data sets, you can do it very easily by using coding, right? On Python or RStudio, you can just put a line of code to pull these specific things out. You can do the same thing also in SQL, wherein like, select this particular column and so on. And then you can also isolate, select star or select zero values from all of that. Now, in data cleaning, there are a few steps. The first step which you do is try and understand whether the data is proper or not. Okay. In data cleaning, over here, if you notice, you will see that suddenly all of these numbers are big numbers, but then we can start to isolate these, right? So what you could do is go all the way up, do select all. There are zeros, and you can go all the way down, and you could find these also. Okay. And these errors, I mean, a few points to pay attention to is number one, is that these errors tend to happen. Why do these errors tend to happen? Simply because if you remember, like it comes in different formats. So when you're converting from one format to another, right, another file format to another, one file format to another file format, it could lead to some sort of misrepresentation of zero as a blank or a star and so on. It's different conventions, right? So different tools also have different ways how they represent zero. Okay. You could also come across NA, you could come across backslash, forward slash. So these all are different symbols to denote a missing value or no data. Okay. So when it comes to data cleaning, we need to check for missing values and zero values, right? So how do we do that? We've shown you how to do it manually. Okay. Now, what do you do once you've got these? Okay. You have now a few options. Now in data cleaning, right, you have option one. Okay. Option one is always check with the data custodian. Okay. Custodian about regarding the missing value. Okay. What do I mean to say by that is if you go back to the data audit and you know that, okay, this I need to check with Santosh because this is actually for the website data. All right. So you wouldn't need to talk to a Megha, or you wouldn't need to talk to like sorry, Megha won't come here. But I mean, like, you wouldn't need to talk to an Abdul or a Matthew. So you know who exactly you need to get in touch with. Okay. So option one is always check with the source of the data and with the contact person for the data custodian. It is this particular team. So you'll talk to Santosh from the whole team. All right. And you'll ask them about, like, we've got these three. So essentially you are sending an email to Santosh with this, right? And you're writing an email mentioning that we noticed that there are some missing values. Kindly help us fix it. All right. Now that is option one. Now option two is in case if there is no response from Santosh, or if the team says that Santosh has left the organization, all the best with your project, we can't help you. If they throw their hands up and they tell that we can't help you to do that, then when it comes to data cleaning, then we have an option of either leave it as blank, okay, right? Wherein you're just being very honest and you're saying that, that is a blank value. We don't know. I mean, it has come as errors over there. Or the other option, which is option 2B, okay? Sorry, option 2B, okay? Versus this one being 2A. Okay. So option 2A versus 2B. Option 2B is you basically do like insert a moving average, sorry, average value, okay, by taking the previous few values. Okay, you basically smoothen the data or the missing data. Okay, let me explain that to you. So the thing is, with option 2A, when you leave it blank, what would happen is when you plot the data, you'll suddenly see that, your graph or that particular curve or whichever data, like, whether using a line chart or a bar chart, you'll suddenly see that there is a drop to zero. Now that would probably impact your modeling results. So hence what you do is you go for option B, which is 2B, which is insert a moving average of values. Okay. How do you do that? Go back over here, select all. Okay. And you notice that there is only one missing value over here. There's another one here and here. So what you could do is you could just do average, okay, of the past 4 weeks. Okay. And then it is called as a 4-week moving average. Or if you would want to make it a bit more smoother, you could take like, 8 week. So over here, we've taken like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm taking this and I'm getting like an average value. And for the reference of everyone, and mainly for the modeling team, we kind of like, highlight it by a different color. So, or we put a whole sort of like, a comment that, missing value, moving average of 8 weeks, taken to fill in. Okay. So this could be another way how you do this. Okay, just that anyone who knows this knows that this is not an outlier data, or this is not like, why did it suddenly go from 5399 to 61? Like, how did this suddenly bump up? So here is where you can then choose to smoothen the data by saying that, let's not take a huge number, because over here the 6,000 start, I mean, or the 6 lakhs start coming in over here. So let's actually take the past 4 weeks only. So then you could probably do 24 or 26. Okay, you're just doing 4 weeks data and you're just smoothening it onto it, just that it doesn't bump up or bump down. Okay, So this is then I'd change it to 4 weeks over here, like edit, and I'd say 4 weeks to fill in data. Okay, and that is done. So this is how we do, like, one example of that. And you could choose to take the same sort of, like, sorry, and you could take the same number over here. Sorry. I'm sorry. I could take the same logic and start filling in these numbers over here. Now, the only danger we need to be very, very careful about is, what if you get a data set or a column, okay, from a data custodian in which there are so many holes or so many of these missing values? Then the most important thing you should do is get in touch and either choose to, like, if there are so many data errors in a particular column, you can choose to ignore that column, because then you're fixing data. And if you're fixing data to that level, it isn't a good thing. It's basically a data collection or a data error as such, and that should not compromise your overall uh, like your overall model creation. Okay, so when it comes to data cleaning, just to summarize, you have, I mean, the process, what we do in this case is pretty straightforward. We basically want to isolate if the columns that we've got, like, because the previous step before this was putting all these columns together and making it into a harmonized, similar data frequency of time series data, right? Once that is done, then we have to go one by one into each column to figure it out, whether each one of them have any missing values or any blanks that come in. Missing values tend to come in because it could be data download errors, transmission error, or, like, conversion error or stuff like that from format to format. So these things tend to happen, but it's for us to kind of, like, clean the data once properly before that, like, to remove these special values and so on. Now, once the data is clean, like every column is clean and done over here, all right. Now it comes to another very important step, which is called as data validation. Okay, so data validation in this case, right? I'll just change the color. So data validation in this stage, what we do, and I'll just put that into context. So you have data validation, right? What is data validation? Now, in data cleaning, we've clearly mentioned that, I need to remove missing values and get it a bit more proper. Correct. So this is all about missing values, right? And in missing values, it was all about, like, the zeros and the ones and so on. Whereas over here, what we do is pretty straightforward. We need to understand, in this case, we need to just clearly understand that is the data set within the logical range. Okay. Or in other words, we need to check for outlier data and fix it. Okay. And what we mean by outlier data is essentially what we are trying to do in this case is we need to pick up the minimum, maximum, average numbers. And here is where the concepts which you would have learned in statistics about the central limit theorem or, like, mean median mode, these are all the concepts that will come to your rescue over here. So if I'm taking the average, I'm sorry, because I have to do the average over there. So let me just put it over here. Okay. So, wait, let me just actually add another column here. And here we have mean, which is the average, right? Then you have maximum value. You have minimum value. Okay. Then you can also put a median, and you can also put the mode value. Okay. And I hope you're all aware about the difference between median and mode. Like, median is basically what is the midpoint number. So you align all your observations from ascending order format, and then you pick up the most middle number, like just like the median of a road is in the middle of the road, you pick up the medium number on that. Mode, on the other hand, returns a particular value. The most commonly occurring observation is the mode. Okay. Now, this actually what you do in this case is you basically do average, right, of this. Perfect. Then, and you do that for the remaining ones. I think these are all blank numbers, but I'll anyhow fill it up for the remaining because you have it all the way going till television here. Yeah. Okay, so, that is maximum over there. So this is average. Okay, so average of this particular one, and I'll just insert one more variable over here. I mean, one more column over here, which is basically this whole variable set. Okay, so when you do this, there we go. Yeah. So this is data validation, which you're doing over here. And by data validation, which we do over here, we are pretty much, yeah. So by data validation, you are doing this whole part. This is the average. Then you have maximum values, max of this whole data set. Okay. Then this is minimum values. This is minimum of this whole data set. Okay. And then this is the median, which is median of this whole data set. Okay. And you have the mode, which is mode of this whole data set. Okay. Yeah. So you continue the same thing for these other data sets over here. And here is actually one of the first few things that you do in terms of a first stage deliverable. Okay. So this is a very important milestone for your data analytics project or your marketing analytics project. That over here, again, because you're not the subject matter expert in most cases, but you will still need to look at these numbers, right? And first thing which you would do is look at these numbers, and if you can look at the minimum and the max values and say that, and just have a verification check that you know for a fact that a minimum value for e-commerce sales should not be there. Okay, qualitatively, e-commerce cannot drop to zero over there. Like in the past, like from 2020 to 2022, there is no reason for that number to go zero. But in case if you find that the minimum value is zero over here for e-commerce sales, it simply is going back to your data cleaning stage, and you would have done a error over there in your data cleaning stage. Like there is still a zero value coming in over there. Okay. Whereas on the other end, if you look at display, YouTube, and SEM, it simply means that I did not advertise at that point of time, which is logical. Okay. But at the same time, if you find that, that there is some, these are all non-zero values, then the quick validation you need to check with the data custodian is that, did you always run an SEM campaign or a Facebook campaign or a print campaign or a TV campaign? Okay, so that's also validating these numbers to figure out whether they're within the agreeable range. Okay, now the other reason why you do mean, median, mode is since mode is the most commonly occurring number over here in these observations, this is very different from the average. It is very different from the median number and so on. So your median and your mode, because if you remember, we were inserting values over here, correct? This is a good check for you to look whether this value which you have corrected, this non-zero value which you've corrected, you could choose to figure out whether you would want to insert the median or the mode. Okay, depending on whichever is the lower number, because if you remember, the main reason why we want it to fit in over here is that it should just manage the break in that number. It should not lead to a spike or a big drop. It should just smoothen out over here. So this is where you can actually use either the median or the mode number to insert or to go back into data validation and plug this thing in. Okay, you can do a bit of course correction on that one basis. So once you've done your data validation, and you will need to get a sign off from each one of the data custodians, because only if they sign off on it, then you are absolved from the whole burden of taking on that, if there is any error with any of these columns. Okay. So once this is done, then you have this other opportunity where you would want to kind of like, because the last stage is data transformation over here. Okay. Now, what do I mean by data transformation? By data collation, we've already got the data audit done. We've created one whole master data set. Data cleaning, we've removed all the zeros, missing values. Data validation, we've also checked whether with each one of the data custodians, that is the data good enough. Okay. Now, once that is done, then you're doing what we call is also data transformation. Okay. By data transformation, I'll now need to explain a few concepts to you. Okay. And for that, I'm just going to isolate just 2-3 data sets. Okay. And I'm going to just take it to that end of the, sorry, one moment. Yeah. So I'm just going to take it down over here. Okay. And let me just paste this over here. And yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this data set over here. And I'm just removing these other ones. Like, just going to take YouTube ads. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just going to take the YouTube ads. Okay. Over here. Now, I'm just going to Now, the concept I just wanted to introduce over here is the concept of, just one moment, let me just clean this up a bit. Yeah. So I'm just going to explain data transformation over here. And let me just take this, one moment, down here a little bit. Yeah. So data transformation is a very interesting concept to the effect that data transformation can help you explain what we call as, like, the decay and carry forward concepts in marketing. Okay, marketing, branding, whichever you can call it that. Now I'm going to explain decay and carry forward. Okay, and I'm going to ask you all a very straightforward question, because it'll help to explain the concept more easier. So over here, I'm going to ask you a question. Will an ad that you saw on, oh wait, let me just frame the question much simpler. Does the ad that you saw on YouTube, okay, have an impact on your purchase behavior, okay, in a few days or weeks time? Okay, and just to kind of like, ask that question once again, if you saw an ad today on YouTube for a product or a service, okay, and you saw that ad today, do you think it has an impact on your purchase behavior tomorrow, day after a week, or so on? Or do you believe that it only has an impact at the moment you saw it? It's a question to all of you. So if you see an ad today, do you think it has an impact only on that day or at that same time? Or do you believe that it has an impact or it has some impact? It could have an impact tomorrow. It could have an impact for a week. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, depends on the necessity of the product. Absolutely. Yeah. So essentially what I hear all of you say is that I saw an ad right now and I immediately did something need not always work, because that's exactly the whole premise of memorability. Correct. And when it comes to this concept of essentially when you see something, or so hence if I saw an ad on this particular day, the investment in ads I made on this particular day, correct? Like if I saw that ad 10 times in today, right, on the 2nd of Jan, I feel that, I remember something of that ad. There was that jingle, or there was that model, or there was that car, or there was that whole song which was being played in the background, or that was a very nice location. Correct. So this is exactly the whole logic of decay or carry forward effects of today's advertising on tomorrow. It's fundamentally on the whole broad concept of memorability. Okay. And it's also the logic why you have sonic branding, why you have visual branding, why you have Airtel ads looking very similar, or you have brands take up color, take up a jingle, the Britannia jingle, so on. Correct. Or the Titan jingle. Like these are all memorable, right? Because when you hear that ting 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 ting, it is a Britannia ad, or the Titan jingle and so on. So essentially what is happening is we are kind of building up a whole bunch of and part of the reason why we spread our advertising across a period of time, you have in advertising, you have we call it as it's called as flighting strategy. Okay. And in flighting strategy, you either have a one time, we call it as pulsing. Okay. Pulsing is just like your heartbeat. Like your heart doesn't beat in one go. It beats rhythmically, right? So rhythmically, or what we call as periodically, right? Investing, placing ads. Like if you're saying that, I will keep putting an ad during the weather report of the 9 p.m. or the 6 a.m. news. So then you know that it will come every time at when the news is there, when the weather report is there, we know one particular ad, and which is what the whole thing like Daikin presents the weather report for on NDTV and so on. Because after a while, Daikin weather report and Daikin makes ACs. So you start then making the connect and stuff like that. So there is a pulsing strategy. Then you have a whole carpet bombing, as some people would call it before, right? Where you would do one whole load of advertising. Okay. And this is also known by another word in which you will say, I'm taking a roadblock. In other words, if I go on to a particular, if I go to say YouTube, I'll find that, YouTube may the masthead, and so many other things. It's like a takeover, right? I mean, that's another word which we use over there, a takeover of the site or of the Yahoo page or of like any particular thing that you look into over there. So you have these different options where you do pulsing, carpet bombing, or you do like, weekend and then stuff like that. So depending on these strategies, the logic is that you're building up memorability. Okay. So how do you capture that in this? Because over here you have only that I advertised like for about 1.2 lakhs worth of YouTube ads on this particular day. So by doing that, what we do is we actually create a DK variable for YouTube ads. Okay. And how do you do that is you basically have to first create, like say, DK and carry forward. Okay. And if the DK is 10%, then the carry forward is equal to 90% minus the DK. Okay. And hence, what you're doing is you're creating YouTube ads over here. And you're saying that if the DK is 10%, then what I'm doing is I'm creating YouTube ads. Okay. DK 10%. Okay. So that is one. Then if I'm creating separate ones over here, okay, and I'm saying if this is like, I'm just going to copy this, and I'm saying if DK is 20%, correct? Wait 1 second. Is 100%, my bad. Sorry, 100% minus this one, and yeah, now it should be fine. Okay, so then, and these add up to 100%, like DK plus carry forward means if there is a DK in the memorability, like you only saw the ad once and you can't remember much about it, then the DK is high, right? But if you place like, a whole lot of ads across a day and people are all tuning into that cricket match and they're seeing only this Oppo ad or Vivo ad, then people remember कि हाँ वो IPL में वो Oppo, Vivo, वो अभी समझ में आ गया types. So in that sense, so then like, the DK is lesser, right? And then you also have like, so you also have 100% DK, correct? And if I'm just going to put it as like say 80%. And I'm going to put it as 50%. Okay. So this is just us creating this and how you're transforming this variable into a variable with DK. Okay, so this is DK with 10, this is DK with 20%, this is DK with 50%, this is DK with 80%, okay, and DK with 100% over here. Okay, now how do you create these variables? The first thing is that you need the base number. So this is the base number. Okay, and the base number is the same all across. Okay, and I'll first just create the DK for 10%, and then we can do the same thing for the others. Okay, so what we're doing in this case is we're saying that, it is this current value plus, right, the DK, or if the DK is 10%, then the carry forward is 90%. Okay, so I'm going to just block this, right? And I'm going to kind of like freeze the, like you'll see this $sign before the number, which is the number is the row. So the row is frozen, the column will keep moving. Okay, so times, and I'm going to say I need 90% of the previous value. Okay, and that is how I create this. So what it has done is it has taken the current value plus 90% of the previous value. So if you notice over here, then when I go down over here and I go down over here, you'll start seeing that, it is actually adding up quite a bit. Correct. And it's simply because the DK is very low. Like the DK is only 10%. Means I'm putting so many ads that the chances for people to not register it or kind of like do like kind of like not remember it is very low. Okay. So this is one option in which I'm saying that, I am doing this. Okay. And if you notice over here, when the zero values start coming, correct, over here, you'll start seeing that it slowly starts decaying, like the decay rate or the rate from which it is going from 10,000, I mean, sorry, uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 lakh to 90,000 to 80,000. And so after how many weeks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 weeks of no activity of a of a high carry forward, which is a low decay, is leading to some impact of the ads over here. Correct. But if I start now moving on to high decay rates, right, which is actually the case in most real life movements, because there's a lot of clutter, there's a lot of other category activity, like it's not your brand or other competition brands, but it is other brands also which are kind of talking a lot. Like if Vivo and Oppo are also talking at the same time, suddenly an Airtel is coming, suddenly a Jio is coming, or suddenly some other Blender's Pride or Royal Stag is coming, and they're also very loud, or they're also taking up a lot of the IPL space. So then that's when you realize that, it becomes like a traffic jam. So it is typically in real life, decay of advertising tends to be pretty high. Okay. And now what you see over here, so if I'm just constructing the same thing, it will be this plus, and I actually just need to, so if I do this plus 80% carry forward, okay, of the previous, and that becomes like the decay for 20%. Okay. And if I just carry for, if I just take this all the way down, and you can see this one thing coming in clearly. Yeah. So I've created a different version of the same YouTube ads over here. And then I'm going to build this up over here. Sorry, my bad. And I'm just going to reduce the decimals. Yeah. And copy and paste. Okay. And the same thing I will continue to do for these other variables, in which I mentioned that this plus 50%, sorry, it will be 50% of this number is that particular. Okay. And you'll see it getting automatically cleaned up. And then you'll find that over here it is the current investment plus carry forward is, because the decay is very high, carry forward is 20% of the previous one. Okay. And then finally, which is like if it is 100% decay, sorry, which is equal to current value plus 100%, or 0%, because the carry forward, the decay is 100%. So there is no carry forward, correct? High clutter, no memorability. And this YouTube ads decay of 100% is exactly what you've got over here, because the numbers are very similar. But these are new, this is a like these columns are transformations of this particular data set to see which one really is more significant in the model. Okay. And more importantly, it also captures the reason why we do these decay variables is simply because we need to capture the flighting strategy. Okay. And to also test whether there are any carry forward effects onto that. So any questions on, so this is pretty much what we do when we come into this part. So I'm just checking. I think someone has a, okay. So Mr. Joginder Chabra has a question that is decay constant during the whole duration of the ad, or it can vary depending on, so that's a good question. And that's pretty much the logic of what I explained. Like, are you doing pulsing strategy, or are you doing like a single burst carpet bombing, or are you, so typically when you plan for any medium, what you tend to do is that you would choose between either of these strategies. Okay. So, or to build on what I just mentioned right now, it is very rare for you to suddenly shift from a pulsing to like a burst or a takeover. Like if you're doing like a takeover, you will just stick to that one takeover or do that takeover for a few days. Like you won't do a takeover plus pulsing and so on. You could have another, and I'll come to that topic in a moment. You could have effects of one other category advertisement which you're running. Like say, for example, if like say, if Royal Stag is advertising and also Blender's Pride is advertising, and they're from the same, or like say, let me just give you a USL or a Diageo example. Like if Johnny Walker is advertising and a Kingfisher is also advertising at the same time, so beers and whiskeys, if they're both advertising at the same time, you could have what we call as halo effects because they're both of the same company. Okay. Or say, for example, what you might find in Maruti Suzuki or in automotive categories, that, you have two different brands like Bajaj Pulsar and Bajaj, like, some other scooter brand is coming out at the same time. We know that it's both Bajaj, or if it is like, Dabur Chyawanprash and Dabur Honey being advertised at the same time, then acha, they're both of the same company called Dabur. So that's when you have like a halo effect. But essentially, I think Ms. Deepthi Deshpande also has a question on carpet bombing pulsing. Okay. So let me just go back to this topic over here, Nietzsche, where I mentioned that, like, yeah. Okay. So when you are advertising, okay, the most important thing is that you have an advertising budget. Okay. And if your budget is like, and your advertising budget is finite. Okay. Finite budget. I'm sorry, you have a finite budget. And in your finite budget, you have to allocate resources in the most optimal or efficient way. Okay. So when you do media planning, on like say digital or even on traditional media, what you do is, how do you plan your media investments? Like, do you want to, like, you have these, what we call as the flighting strategy. Okay. The flighting strategy is essentially telling you that, do I, like, how often should I place my ads? That's the question you're trying to answer. Okay. And this question is a very tricky one to answer for the simple reason that, most of the times what we do is that, because you have like, I mean, it's that good old thing about like, if I were to ask you in a very simpler day-to-day kind of a thing, that would you want to, like, if you want to buy a ticket for a flight, correct? You obviously won't go and buy 3 flight tickets or 4 flight tickets, right? You will look at 4 options, but you'll buy 1 flight ticket because your budget is only for 1 ticket. But sometimes what tends to happen is that you want to ensure that, acha, I will book at different places and see which one is coming through. Or like if all of them are waitlisted, what you would do is that you would probably just book in, say, a Rajdhani. You would put also a ticket in the Shatabdi, and you will also take some other express train like that. And you'll just hope to see that, okay, which of these will kind of really come through. Correct. So just like the same way how you book, I mean, if all three tickets are waitlisted and they're moving at their own different rates, you will probably just just to minimize your likelihood of not getting any ticket, you book three tickets in say Rajdhani, Shatabdi, or any other express train. And obviously, because you will want to kind of you can only travel in one train at one point of time. Correct. You can't travel in the same one in all three different trains. So just like that same way, what advertisers they do is that they know that, okay, this person will probably purchase only once. So I need to kind of at least ensure that the person is seeing my ad, the message is going through, and stuff like that. Okay. So essentially what you're trying to do in this case is you are spreading, and just to build on what I'm mentioning, like if you have Facebook, if you have YouTube, you have Insta, okay, and if you have, like, say, Twitter. Okay. Now, if you're mentioning, like if you're doing like a, like this is your media schedule. Okay. And in your media schedule, you would actually put out like day one, say day two, okay, and day three, going on like that. What you would do is you would actually kind of mention that I'll do an ad over here. Like here, I will go active. Here, I will go active. Okay. And here, I will also do something because on the same day, I'm doing that. And then I will do Twitter over here. So this becomes like a media schedule. Okay. And if you are running this schedule for like a whole duration of your campaign, what you will notice is that you will see a pattern. Okay. That you might do something like a day 5, day 6. Okay. Yeah. You might notice that, if you start extending this and you start building this bigger, you will start seeing that, you are putting an FB ad only once every week. Okay. So this is day 7, right? Day 7. Yeah. So essentially you will notice that you're doing this in this way. And if you are putting all, like, you're active in all on this particular day, correct? And this is what we kind of like call as a site takeover. I mean, or you're doing like a surround campaign. Or we also call it as like, roadblock and so on. If you've taken enough, if you've taken enough advertisements across all of these sites and you're only seeing that ad coming on and on and on. So you're blowing up, in this case, what you're doing is like, you're blowing up almost all your money on a single day. Okay. So it's when you're just putting like a burst. So we also call this as a burst advertising and stuff like that. So these are all different tactics that we use. Like you do a site takeover in which you take the YouTube masthead and you take most of the landing page, like you take all other ad like options over there, but you're focusing on the single day. Okay. And it could be like, we are open, come to this particular website for this big sale, 20% off for big Diwali sale and stuff like that. It could happen. But if you're doing something like, on Facebook on this particular day, like I'm just building on this example, that if on Facebook I'm putting only once in 7 days, right? And if I'm doing this like, if this is like, once a week, right? This is what I call as a pulse. Okay. Because just like your heartbeat, like it is doing 60 beats per minute or 70 beats per minute, this has a rhythm. Okay. So this is like a pulsing strategy. This is like a burst strategy. Then you also have another strategy in which, like, you'll be doing a staggered, like you will do it for this whole, like one whole week, something like that. And then you will go off. Okay. So stuff like that I mean, these are all different campaign tactics that we use. And in this case, what we do is that we just do these transformations to figure out that if I did something like a pulsing strategy, did the ad I saw 1 week before, did it have something over here? Did it have an impact over for the 7th or the 8th day of the ad? Or by doing this one thing, like, did it have an impact over these few days over here? So these are all the different sort of like, things that tends to happen. So to give you perspective, in elections, I'm sure you all know about this, that in elections, you have 1 day before the election, okay? Election is kept as a day without campaigning. Correct. Why is that? I mean, question to all of you. Like, if you're living in parts of UP or Himachal or Punjab, or even I think Himachal, Uttarakhand, yeah, these are 5 states that are going in for polls very soon, right? In this year. So you know for sure that 1 day before the polls, before you go and cast your vote, it is a day for you to have no campaigning. What is the reason behind that? Yeah. So it is poll preparation and law and order. But it is also kept, and if you remember from our civics, social studies, civics books, which we had before, it's mainly for you as a person who's casting a vote to have a perspective. Ki dekho, I need some time. I've heard everyone. I need people. Yeah, exactly. I need some time to figure out that who I need to vote for. Otherwise, imagine if we had campaigning going on till the day of casting the votes. It'll be pandemonium, right? A lot of people will come. They'll even take you inside the booth. They'll make you also press the button. They'll do all of that, right? So it'll not be free and fair. So hence the most important thing is that you're given 1 day. So in that day, it is for you to decide on who you want to cast your vote for, or who you don't want to cast. Like some of us decide to do nota, correct? So none of the above, right? So just like that, you have pauses in these different campaigns also, simply because all campaigns don't have the money to run every day. Every wish of a marketer is that I want to run my campaign every day, but you can't because they don't have the money. The cost of media is very high. So essentially, the big trick over here then is that, just like in elections, is that how do I campaign in such a way that people can remember and people can vote for my party or my candidate? Correct. So the same way for marketing, what we do is we have so many options to advertise, but we also need to know, because there is a strategy, there is a logic, correct? There is a creative behind that. I will have 5 jingles, and I will start with one jingle here, another jingle here. So it is to basically understand that what is the impact of spacing it all in 1 day, spacing it between 1 week after another. Is it having an impact? So that's why you do this creation of the um, DK variables over here. And which is the reason why, it's trying to answer this question that, do you think the ad which you saw yesterday has an impact on your purchase decision or impression of the brand today? Okay. So in effect, this kind of touches upon the whole data wrangling part. As I mentioned earlier, this is all on Excel because it's a smaller data set. But if you use SQL, then you can access larger data sets, and you can build this whole table together. And then once this table is built, then using Python or using RStudio, you can do data validation, data cleaning. You can also then start doing your data transformations too. Okay. So once all of this thing is done, then you can start doing your descriptive and analytics. and start looking at what the hypotheses are and all that. Okay. So any questions anyone has on these stages? This recording will come to you definitely, and this Excel also will. Okay. So any questions anyone has at this stage? I hope you're all clear about, like, if you get data tomorrow, you know how to start off the project, at least by getting in touch with the different people who are going to give you the data sets. You can make your data audit document, and you can also have a good idea about, like, and this also gives you an idea about the different stakeholders you're in touch with. Like what you find over here, like this whole, like this is your, these are the stakeholders, these are the people who can help you kickstart your project properly, correct? And of course, like, more importantly about, like, who to turn on to, or like if there are any problems with the data coming in at different stages. So this pretty much kind of, like, sums up the data wrangling part, which is data collation, data audit creation, data cleaning, data validation, and data transformation. All of this takes easily a lot of time. All right. It takes time mainly because there are data errors, there are data validation checks that you need to do. Sometimes there is missing data, sometimes you will get new data. So because of all of these reasons, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks on an average for churn modeling or media mix modeling. But once you do this for once, then the next time that you're collecting fresh data, it tends to be a lot more quicker. For the first time that you do it, it will take about 3 to 4 weeks to set this thing up. All right. So now we'll just move on quickly to the part which is on A/B testing. Okay, so yeah, that's the whole part on data wrangling, and if anyone has any questions on that. Okay, so we're going to touch upon A/B testing, and in this, like, when it comes to customer analytics, we have this HEART framework, which is mainly used by the UX team, which is the user experience team. I think the user experience team and Google used to use it a lot, right? And I think someone has a question. One moment. Okay, what was done as part of the data transformation? So we transformed, I'll just go back to that sheet one moment. So what we did was we transformed the data, and this is only one data set that we transformed. Okay, like over here, yeah, sorry. We only transformed this one data set, but you could transform the data for, like, say, Facebook, print, TV. You could create similar transformed variables. And what I mean by data transformation is that this is with decay of 100%. This is with decay of 10%, 20%, 50%, and 80%. Okay, so yeah, so moving on. Yeah, so this is the HEART framework, and the HEART framework actually puts a lot of these metrics into perspective, right? Because if you remember yesterday, I showed how each one of these metrics can come into, it can come into the different parts of a marketing funnel. So just like that, I mean, this is another way how, you have a framework in which happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. You have these specific metrics that can help you tick off on all of these. So you could even build a scorecard using the HEART framework. Like if your NPS score is like say 70%, 80%, and your bounce rate is like, say 4%, like, 20, 25% and stuff like that. You could even construct a score for your heart score. Okay. And this basically is a framework for you to know that which part of your user experience is good and which part of your user experience has a bottleneck, which you need to clear. Hypothetically, if your NPS score is high, but your bounce rate is also high, right? It simply means that for those people who come into your website, they really are converting well as happy customers who advocate for your brand. But if your bounce rate is high, it simply means that a lot of people are accidentally coming into your website. So if you dig a bit deeper into your bounce rate challenge, it could be because your URL might be very similar to another URL, correct? Like someone is coming to ndtv.com, but if your website is ndtve.com or tvi.com, then it could be a lot of misattribution. A lot of people want to go to ndtv.com, but they're coming to ndtie or something, which is your website. So bounce rate analytics or bounce rate analysis is very important for us to take out misattribution. Because if your bounce rate is high, it's typically you just need to go and check your URL, or you need to check whether the search keywords are such. Sometimes you bid for those search keywords in which someone else is also bid out for it. And if it is a lot of competition for it, you could find a lot of people clicking on your website accidentally. And if they click on your website and they realize that's not the site I want to go into, they'll immediately within 5 to 10 seconds, if they kind of like leave the website, it's counted as a bounce. Okay. So looking at all of these numbers as a stack, as a heart stack, you can construct a metric for your product or service, and it can give you an idea about where is your weak link. Okay. So that's about the heart framework. And I just wanted to spend some more time on bounce over here, which is that, first of all, when you look at your engagement metrics, your bounce between app and website tends to vary. Okay. Because it takes about 2 to 3 seconds for each of these to kind of like load up. And what we know very well is that, from some studies which were done, that in 13 seconds, if you find that your visitors have left your website, it simply is an indicator that your bounce rate is high. And I've just explained a bit about the bounce rate, the reasons why your bounce rate could be high. It could be misattribution. Sorry, it could be your website URL being very similar, right? It could be the keywords that you've chosen and stuff like that. So bounce is an important thing, and it's important also to realize that it's like, the bounce rate isn't standard across different industries. The session duration metrics varies across industries, and some industries, they sign you out automatically because they want to manage their load. In other words, if you sign on to Spotify and you leave it on for the whole day, it will keep playing. Okay. Ads will come, go, and it'll keep playing. But if you sign on to ICICI, or if you sign on to IRCTC, after a point of time, because they have huge volumes to deal with, you will get timed out. So there is a default option for on one end in which your high sessions, in which you can keep on running it till you log it out, or your battery runs out, or either of those. Whereas you have these other ones like low session timeouts, in which you have to get timed out for security reasons or for managing traffic like IRCTC, right? So that's another one point. And then it also depends on your customer journey, which is planned for the brand or industry. All right. and this is what we talked about yesterday, that we've placed CAC, LTV, and CSAT and NPS scores on the mid and the bottom of the pyramid metrics. The top of the pyramid metrics are what typically media tends to drive impacts for. Okay. And if you map the heart metrics, you'll start seeing that the heart metrics actually give you like a top, middle, and your bottom sort of metric over here. So if you actually use or embrace the heart metrics as a framework, it gives you a clear idea about what your score at each one of these numbers are. So if your bounce rate is low and your sign up is also low, then it means that there is something which you need to do with your targeting. Because if not targeting it, it's something which you need to do with your value proposition, that people are coming to your website out of some sort of excitement, but they're not as excited to sign up. Correct. Or if you start putting numbers across all of this and you can start looking at the shape of your funnel, you will start to see where the bottlenecks are. Like if you find that your bounce rate is low, the sign up is high, but your CAC or your LTV is very low, or if your LTV is very low, it simply shows that people are not paying up much for it. Like they're not finding much value into it. So it is a product uh, thing you need to fix. You need to make it more appealing and stuff like that. So depending on what your numbers are for your product or service, if you get these numbers populated, you can give appropriate strategies to fix up these aspects. Okay. And now how do you get these numbers? Like I'm sure like you would have seen it on the platform that, okay, these are the numbers, here's where you can get and all that. So if you go to SimilarWeb over here, okay, and I'll show it to you in a moment. If you go to SimilarWeb and you put in like say UpGrad versus Simply Learn, right? It will give you a clear idea about your total web visits, your engagement, your average site duration, page per visit, your bounce rate. So you get a whole lot of your heart metrics coming up over here already, right? Another website is neilpatel.com. It used to be called as Uber Suggest, but then Neil Patel purchased it and he's made it his own. This gives you a lot more information beyond these numbers. It also gives you an idea about what the search trends are, what the backlinks are, and stuff like that, organic traffic and all of that, right? And I'll show that to you in a moment. And now we're coming on to A/B testing. Okay. So when it comes to A/B testing, if you remember, like I mentioned, like there is segmentation, A/B testing, and then there is churn modeling, and then you have market mix modeling. Okay. So in A/B testing, what you're trying to do, and this is mainly more towards those internal marketing analytics teams who are tasked with improving, like say for example, if you notice that I need to increase the sign up, or I need to increase the I know that people have come to the website, or people need to come to the website, and I noticed that the people who've come into the website, they're not progressing from the home page to the cart page. Like nobody is shopping, or those people who are shopping, they're not going to the checkout counter and they're not buying. So if you start to notice that, there is a sign up problem or there is a checkout problem. So once you have your numbers to show, you have the data to show that there is a bottleneck, then how do you fix it? And part of a part of what you do to fix this is in this whole area of what we call as running experiments or running A/B tests. Okay. Now, A/B testing compared to like old age marketing, which is, or like new age marketing, because you have a digital product, you actually have a lot of options to suddenly make a change onto your app or your website, and you can deploy it across all your markets or only for some select markets. So digital digital marketing has those flexible options at play. Like you can have a particular landing page for the south of India, another landing page for like east of India. You can have one with only Assamese for only people who live in Assam, geofence it and stuff like that. So there's so many options that you can do. Now, when it comes to A/B testing, what you're basically doing is you want to test whether there is a like I mean like essentially in an A/B test, you want to make a change and you want to prove that change which you're making to the website, design, button, color scheme, font, any change that you want to make. All right. Like, and if I were to give you an example, like if you open up WhatsApp right now, you know that it comes as WhatsApp as the startup screen when you press the app button, and then on the bottom it used to be from Facebook, right? But now it is coming as from Meta, correct? And when Facebook moved to Meta, they would have actually run a few tests to figure out whether who likes what. Correct. And by doing that, it's pretty much giving them an idea. They want to know that, are people liking it or not? And hence, when you're doing an A/B test, they would have done a test to figure out like which color goes well, like which like do we go for blue or do we go for a deeper blue and stuff like that. So essentially, what they want to do is they want to measure a metric. Correct. So in an A/B test, you have some very specific things that is laid out over there. What you do is and I'll explain that in a moment with an example. Okay. So why do we need A/B testing, and and how do we do it? You pretty much start off with taking similar size of two samples, sample A and sample B. They have to be of the same size and they have to be of the qualitatively same composition. Like you can't have sample A of only men and sample B of women, or sample A of kids and sample B of adults. They have to have equal representation ideally. Otherwise, what you will get is you will get skewed results. You will get a result of like, okay, women like it more than men and stuff like that. Because you want to be consistent across, you want it to be the sample to be qualitatively and quantitatively similar. Okay, so that's one about about the composition of the sample A and sample B. But the more important thing is you want to actually understand what is the change you want to test. So you have to be very specific, like I'm changing a button, I'm changing a color, or I'm changing one feature, or I'm going to change the button name from buy to kharido, or stuff like that. And you want to know that by making that change, is it leading to any positive or negative impact on a KPI? So you need to decide what the KPI is. And in most cases, the KPI is frozen on before you before you do the A/B test. Okay. So what you do essentially, and the process of an A/B test is you do the whole process to pretty much get a handle on what is working, what is better. And I'm sure you all will agree that most of the apps on our smartphones or most of the websites, they keep changing, they keep tweaking it. Why? Simply because the earlier thing which we spoke about, if things are very boring and drab, what tends to happen is that you might churn out. So to prevent churn, to make things fresh, to add new features, to be relevant to the customer, these are all the most important reasons why A/B testing is done. Okay. And obviously, if there is a bottleneck in your heart framework that you spotted or in your whole marketing funnel, you need to fix that. And how do you fix it? You pretty much make some change into the product. Now, compared to new product development and old marketing, over here, you can quickly change a digital product, the look and feel of it, the font, compared to if you're making a physical product, you have to go back to the production line, change the color, do that. It's a higher throughput time, or it's a higher amount of time for traditional marketing, or like, physical marketing, compared to if you have to do it for digital marketing. All right. So A/B testing is very much a tool which is used by marketers, right, to be relevant, to stay in touch and to manage churn for their customers. Okay. So the process is very straightforward. You have a hypothesis. You know what is the feature that you want to fix. And if your hypothesis is that we are going to change from the buy button to the Kharido Se button, why? Because we believe that most of our customers are coming from north of India, Hindi speakers. So by doing that, they will feel a lot more affinity towards the brand, and they will understand it better. Okay. And because of that, we believe that our like sign outs or our checkouts will grow higher. So the KPI in this case would be the checkout being higher in that. The hypothesis is that we believe that Indian languages like Hindi, like, is because most of our customers are from the Hindi speaking markets, HSM markets. We believe they will come and they will click on this, and we will get larger, like 5%, 10%. And that's a key success metric over here. All right. And the change in the metric. So you also have to have what we call as a delta, which you're looking at. If you have like a 5% or a 10% increase, and that's what you're reasonably looking at, you have to also specify that one part. Okay. And that's what I just mentioned, that it's all about understanding the deltas. If you feel that there is a small increase only, then that change is not really warranted. What you have is working, you don't need to break it. But if you feel that there is a 20%, 50%, or a significant enough delta, then it means that the change which you're making is actually working. Okay. And you have this tool called A/B test guide, okay, which you can use to calculate A/B tests. And pretty much, yeah, like, it's coming down to that topic of hypothesis forming, and like, what is the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, and confidence intervals and p-values. So I'll touch upon this one topic in a moment. And it's basically our demo. Now I know we've just touched upon our 1 o'clock deadline. So I'll just take 5 minutes, if it's okay with all of you, to just show you like, the similar web, as well as like, the similar web and hypothesis testing. So if I have about 5-10 minutes, is it okay with all of you, or would you want me to touch upon this in the next live session? Okay. So is it okay if I just take 5-10 minutes more, and we can then cover hypothesis, like A/B testing, and this one? I can just show you like a small demo. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So as I mentioned, and I'm just going to go on to a new share. Okay. So first things first, yeah. So in A/B testing, I mean, if you remember, the first thing is a hypothesis, right? Okay. So in an A/B test, correct? The first thing is, if you are mentioning what the objective of the test is, okay? So if the objective of the A/B test is pretty straightforward. That, oops, sorry. Yeah. So what is the objective of the A/B test? And over here, if you're mentioning that, one moment. We would want to change the website language to include the language option versus only English. Okay, so this is like, say, probably the whole objective of the A/B test. Now, how do you do this? Or how do you set up this A/B test or experiment? Now, the first thing is that you will take your sample specs. Okay, and in your sample specs, what you will do is you will want to define, and as I mentioned, like, we will take two samples, right? So sample A and B are of the same composition, correct? And in this case, what you're doing is, if you're telling that, size equals like 200, okay, respondents for each group. Okay, so total, that's equal to total of 400 respondents, okay, or 400 users. The other thing is the qualitative part, right? The qualitative part is sample composed of, say, 35% female and 65% male. Okay, and it has to be across both samples. If you have both samples to have different compositions, then it is not a like-to-like comparison, and hence your results could get skewed. Okay, and hence you do that whole part. Then, as you remember, we are doing that whole part of, like, you have to mention the experiment duration. This is very important, because how much time do you think it will take for us to complete this experiment to get 200 completes? Okay, the time we need to run the A/B test or the experiment, okay, to ensure that we get 200 completes. Okay, a complete is like, say, a person has seen the website, spent enough time on it, right? And we believe that they had enough time to either click through or close or bounce. Okay, like what activity did they perform? Then we also kind of, like, if you remember, we have to mention the KPI, and also what is the delta. Okay, the significant delta in KPI between the samples. Okay, so once this thing is sorted, so the KPI over here is, we feel that, if I change the website from, and herein is what the whole, I mean, by looking at the objective and the KPI, we will get onto the hypothesis. Okay, so the KPI over here, what we're saying is that if we believe that, by changing the website from English to Hindi, or like it's only English before, but we are saying that English and Hindi, if we have that option, we believe that the duration and or like, basically that the bounce rate will go low. Because if our hypothesis then over here, okay, our hypothesis is that visitors from Hindi-speaking markets in India do not access our website to English only option. Okay, so this is a hypothesis. Okay, and I'm just kind of like, mentioning this as the hypothesis. We will construct what the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis from this one statement. So this is the hypothesis that we have. And then we are saying, okay, the objective is that we want to change. So let us experiment by creating an option for it. We have the sample specs over here, right? And we also have like, and yeah, I mean, like, sorry, 1 second. Living in Hindi speaking markets in India. Okay, so we have to be very specific about these aspects. Okay, and possible users of our website. Hence, they are what we call as digital customers. So we are not running after people who are not like, like they do not have a smartphone or they do not have that. So we're not running after the wrong customers. Okay, so we define all of that specifically. And we also mentioned the time when we need the, like, and if you're saying like, if you're saying 14 days is the period when we want to run it for, okay, to get enough completes of the whole part. And over here, the KPI, if you're saying that, if your duration time, or if you're saying as simple as that, we believe that the bounce rate amongst Hindi speaking users goes down by say 10%. Okay. So obviously, if you should have this number, what it is currently. And if it is like, you're mentioning currently at like, 45% bounce rate. Okay. So the acceptable range which you're looking at is that I want to get something which is at least, if I run this experiment of putting this Hindi website option, I want to see bounce rate to drop from 45 to at least 35. Then I would say that this is a success. Okay. So the significant delta is like, can bounce rate move from 45% to 35% at least in HSM markets. Okay, Hindi speaking markets over there. So you set up this whole thing, then you brief the UX team to make the Hindi website and that one, and the English website option. And then what you will do is that you have sample A and sample B, sample A and sample B, correct? Of the same size and the same, like, 200 and 200. And they have the same, like, smartphone or mobile website, or they have a email ID, or they access the website they access the internet once in a week and stuff like that. You recruit the sample, or what you do is basically you kind of like, have two versions, right? Two versions of the website, correct? And one version you show, in other words, this is the English only website. My bad, sorry, website. And this is the English plus Hindi option. Okay. And what you're going to do is you're going to show this to sample A and you're going to show this to sample B. Okay. And you're going to measure what their bounce rates are. Okay. So this all is happening after your UX team has made it. And this happens over like, 14 days time. Once all of that happens, okay, experiment time period. Okay. Once this is done, what you are doing in effect is then you run this and you get the numbers, okay, the bounce rate. And if over here you get like bounce rate is like say it was 45%, or like if it is coming as like, 48%, and this is the bunch who've seen this one and they're getting like, 33%, stuff like that. Now, by looking at the numbers, you might say, hey, it is better, or it is worse, or stuff like that. But what we would need to do is that you need to actually test the hypothesis. And in this case, if this is what the hypothesis, correct, is, and I'm just going to copy this down over here, right? If this is the hypothesis which you have, your null hypothesis in this case, correct? Your null hypothesis in this case is essentially what you're saying is that, the hypothesis we believe, in other words, what you're saying is that we believe that by putting a Hindi option for the website, right, it would lead to people accessing the website a lot more and the bounce rate will go lower. So over here, as far as A/B testing is concerned, what this is trying to say is that, or if I were to just take this over here and let me just put this as a different color. Okay. So the hypothesis basically means that the Hindi speaking sample is different from the English, the Hindi sample, right, which is sample B, correct, over here, is different from the English sample, which is sample A. Correct. That's what we're trying to imply. Because over here we're saying visitors from the Hindi speaking markets in India, they don't access it because of English. What we mean to say is that we want to change this by, if we give them a Hindi option, it becomes accessible for them. Correct. So, okay. So Mr. Vinay Yadav has a question that how will these two versions be exposed to customers to get the data? Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, that the UX team will build one website for English, which is already there. They'll build another one with a English and a Hindi option, and they will run this experiment for 2 weeks, 14 days. Okay. And once you do it, you will get this data. And once this data is there, then we need to kind of test the data significance. All right. So that's what I mentioned over here. Like, you create two versions of that. The UX team will run it for 14 days and you will get the bounce rate after 14 days. Okay. After experiment is over for 14 days. Okay. So before you do all of this, the most important thing is that the hypothesis says that, basically we need to create a separate option of Hindi over here. And so the hypothesis is saying that the Hindi sample A is different from the English sample. Okay. So the null hypothesis is basically saying that because the null of a hypothesis, which is null of the hypothesis, says that there is no difference between the sample A and sample B, which is Hindi website option and English option have same bounce rates in this case. Okay, that's what this is just trying to imply. Okay, so in this case, the null hypothesis is such, and what we're just trying to do in this case is we need to then test the hypothesis. No, so Mr. Yadav, what we do is that before a feature is being launched, you want to test whether this feature is going to work or not. Okay. So you need to test it to see before you deploy, because if you deploy it and it is a failure, then you will have a huge loss that you need to deal with. Like if your customers have temporarily churned out and stuff like that. So A/B testing is done on a regular basis. Sorry, they do it on a regular basis because they want to get a handle of, does it work for a small sample, and can I then expand it onto the whole website. Okay. So sometimes you might notice that when you go onto some websites, they ask, you might see that there are some changes to the website, or they might ask you to take part in a survey, or they might just not even tell anything. They'll just show you something very different. It's all part of an A/B test for them to understand, like, what the KPI metric which they're looking at. They're just trying to figure out that by making a change, is it leading to a lot of people not using the website, or any particular KPI, whether it is changing or not. Okay. So once you get this thing done, then you basically need to kind of like, once you define the hypothesis, right? And the null hypothesis is basically saying that there is no difference between the samples. Okay. In other words, there is no difference between the sample A and B, which means that no need to make the change. Okay, that's what the null hypothesis is trying to establish. The hypothesis, the reason why we want to make the change is this, which is the reason why we do the A/B test, correct? And in this case, we're saying that, okay, let us see if there is enough data to see that people are either kind of like the bounce rate is going lesser or stuff like that. So we've already defined all of these things before the A/B test, right? The hypothesis, the null hypothesis, all of that is there. We ran the A/B test and the results have come over here. Okay. Now, if you go, and I'm just going to this website called A/B Test Guide. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So in this, sorry, can you all see my screen? Yeah. Can you all see? I think it's bouncing a lot. Sorry, one moment. I'll just open up a Chrome. So if you see this one moment. Yeah. So in this, can you all see my browser? Yeah. So once you've done your A/B test, what you need to do is then you need to kind of like start putting in the numbers over here. Okay. So the website name is this one. I'll just paste it over here. Okay. So once you go over here, what you're doing is you need to then include the size. So you did 200 and 200 over here. Okay. And what are the conversions over here? So what were the conversions? So if you look at the number which we had 48% conversion, which is like, which is the bounce rate, which is 48% of 200 and 33% of sample B. Correct. So that's 96 and 66. This should be 96 and this is 66. Okay. So once you go to this one and you do test evaluation, you do apply changes, and then you'll see that, it is not significant. Because at confidence of 90% or 99%, 95% or 99%, you find that it is not really significant because the conversion rate isn't up to part, because A and B, and this is what the whole logic is, that if you look at a single test or a two-sided one, you'll start to see that, that there is a significant result on this one part. Because if you take one-sided versus two-sided tests over here, on two-sided tests, if you're looking at 90% or 95% or 99%, you will start to see that it is a significant result, where B is converting better than A. So in this case, you can, because it is significant, you can then you can reject the, because if you see the null, the p-value over here, right, at 90% or 95% or 99%, you'll find that the p-value is 0.01, 0.001. Okay, so it is significant. Correct, and this kind of gives you this whole output over here. Okay, so do you want to be, so this whole hypothesis, we need to change it to a two-sided, because you're doing like a two-sample test over here. Okay, so this is how you can input, after you do the A/B test, input the data, do your conversion numbers, and then it will give you your settings finally. So yeah, I mean, so what I did was, let me just share that once again. The Excel, if you remember, if we notice, and this is for all of us, that we took the samples as 200 and we ran, after we ran the experiment for 2 weeks. Okay, so this is an input that the UX team, so the UX team will share this input. Okay, now once they share this input, what they will do is they will then kind of taking this number. So 48% of 200 is 96. 33% of 200 is 66. So that is a bounce rate, right? So sample A, sample B. So I've input 296, 266 in this particular A/B test. One moment, let me just show that once again to you. Yeah, so that's where I put the 296, 266. And I choose the two-sided hypothesis because it's a two sample, correct? And then it shows that it is a significant test result, okay? Which is B, observed conversion rate is 33% and 48%. That's the same number which you saw, correct? And because of that, we can say we can be 99% confident that this result is a consequence of the changes. And the change which we did on A versus B was we showed B the whole, we showed the conversion rate, right, of the Hindi website option. Okay. So this is how you can do this. And you have these three options of 90%, 95%, and 99%. And it basically shows you this is your confidence interval. Okay. Like how much margin of error are you finding? So this pretty much, once you run an A/B test, collect the data from the UX team. Once you do that data ID, like then you just put the size of each of the samples and you put the conversion numbers, the raw numbers over here, do a two-side test, and you can either choose between 95 or 99. Typically, we are fine with 95. Okay, 90 is also fine because it's a UX test which we tend to do, right? A margin of error of 10% is fine also. So across all of these three levels of confidence interval, you're finding that it is still significant, like it is still significant and so on. Okay. So this is how you can do the A/B test results interpretation. And you basically, what this simply tells us, and as it says, you can be 99 confident that this result is a consequence of the change. So hence the change which we made was that we added the Hindi option. So your verdict will be that, adding the Hindi option, we can roll it out across the whole website. Okay. Okay, how do you do A/B testing manually without software? So, okay, how you do that is typically you do it for the same, because the same experiment has to be done in the same process, the same scientific way. So say for example, and theoretically you can do an A/B test in a way that if you have two different gift coupons, okay, you have one gift coupon which is in English and another one which is in Hindi. Okay. And if you send the gift coupons and you ask them to give a missed call to two different numbers, that is one way also how you can test it. So you can use the same logic for doing two different versions of a missed call, like one missed call in Hindi. Like if you're giving a coupon, you're mailing a coupon to people in Hindi, or you're mailing a coupon for people in English. So you can do that manually also. But once you get the responses that these many people call the number, like you send it to 200 people in English, you send it to 200 people in Hindi, and from that 96 people for the English one responded and 66 for the Hindi one, then you can kind of like input it into this this website and it will give you the response. So you can even do it manually, but this is yeah. So the null hypothesis over here is rejected. And what is your null hypothesis? That both samples are the same. In other words, what you are saying is that no, we don't need the Hindi website. But over here, you can reject that null hypothesis, and hence the verdict is that yes, you can go for a Hindi option in the website. Okay, so any further questions for anyone? You can use this website to kind of like analyze your A/B testing results. Okay, and I've just given you some extra information just to get an idea about what goes behind an A/B test. And what is the most important thing is that you have to have similar representation from a qualitative and a quantitative aspect. Qualitative simply because you should have, if you have men and women mixed in a particular proportion in one sample, try to get the same sort of like number over there, because if you do that, it works out better. So that's pretty much the part on the live demo of the A/B test option. So any questions anyone has on today's session? Okay. So in the meantime, if you could just, like, as I mentioned about the NPS score and the CSAT score that we also collect on our end. So if you could just type in your responses on the feedback link, which is shared. And in the meantime, if you have any questions on today's session, I'd be happy to take it up. You could just type it on the in the chat window. So thank you so much for taking some extra time out today to cover up some of the topics we missed out on yesterday. But thank you so much for taking the time out on a busy Sunday, that was the first Sunday of the new year. So if you could just spare a moment to fill in the responses to the feedback on the feedback form. And in case if you have any questions, you could type it out in the chat box once we are done. All right. So thank you, everyone. Have a nice weekend, and I hope today's session was helpful for all of you. Take care and see you on the next weekend. We have our last session, the live session for the MBA X program. So have a nice weekend, everyone. And once again, Happy New Year to all of you. Take care.